we're at them, like, regardless. So, okay, well, welcome to the last, if not, if one of the last, if not the last CBRC meetings. So I wanted to kick it off real quick before we dig into the meat of it with roll call and making sure that somebody is taking notes and identifying presence and absence. As Yasuri, are you doing that this evening?
Yes, I am.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate that. And then also there were minutes that were sent out from two folks by Yasuri earlier, about 5 hours ago. Thank you. Roger has them printed out. So I wanted to make sure that folks had an opportunity to go over there and highlight anything that might be missing. I did not notice anything, so I'd like to get a proposal to get those adopted and approved unless anybody has objections. All right, Roger is, I assume, going to vote in favor, or are you just raising your hand?
No, I have an objection.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know, the pages aren't numbered, but there is a reference to our draft letter to the legislature, and it says, Roger, the legislative letter, it has been an ongoing document from the last meeting and will be sent by Roger along with names of the committee members. And I don't remember being tasked with that responsibility, and I think that's incorrect.
That hawk eyes there. Do you want to be tasked with that?
No, I'm not looking for that task. I had understood that, in fact, you were going to assemble last minute changes, and once we had agreed as to who the recipients were, you would dispatch it to.
Yes. I can't pull anything over on you, Roger. Yes, I did say that I would do that. Damn. All right. So, duly noted. And any other concerns with it? With the minutes? Yes, Roger?
I clicked on the wrong thing. I move that we approve the minutes as written with the correction that the co-chair Judah will take responsibility for the draft letter to the legislature.
I will go ahead.
Oh. Pardon me, Yasuri, you were saying something?
Sorry, I will go ahead and make that correction on the minutes, and we will make sure that I'm not sure what the protocol is usually when we have to make these corrections, but I can get it out again to you guys as soon as we're off from the meeting so we can make those corrections on there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. So it's been proposed. Is there a second for it?
Second.
All right. Then I'll assume that we have general approval. Are there any objections to accepting the minutes with the amendment? Once, twice? Nope. All right. So moved. So then the meat of the discussion, which I wanted to start off before we start digging into the particulars of it, with a note that just kind of acknowledging that the last meeting, that I was trying to facilitate and such, there were sort of two things that really sort of popped up for me, and I wanted to make sure we addressed. One of which is that we lost focus. On a couple of things. There were different agendas kind of going in different directions, and people felt like important elements were not heard and or addressed, in the meeting. And so I heard feedback from a couple of folks of that being the case and that having some frustration around it. And then also some contentious language and or feelings that were brought up. And so I wanted to first off just acknowledge like that was a real thing, and that happened, and I don't want to dismiss it. If we had much longer together and we were near the beginning of our process with this committee, I would suggest that we take time to really dig into some of those issues and think more deeply about how we want to work on those going forward. As it is, this is the very end of our process. And so we're kind of constrained into what we can do there. And so I want to acknowledge that this is going to be highly imperfect. And we're not going to be able to get everything I wanted to come out of it. But I did want to bring us back around to the notion that we are here to get this, to digest the budget we've worked on with staff and that has been proposed to us. And we're trying to bring our collective experiences and our different lenses from the communities we come from and for our personal experiences, but in overall service of the entire district. And so while each of our own lenses, which very much include frustrations and hopes, I want us to all feel free to bring these, but we need to remind ourselves to take a step back and think about like, how does this fit into the process of making this budget a better document that really speaks towards the equity goals that we've centered first and foremost about our process, and for the largest number of kids who need the most help. And so I had a couple of conversations, as did Sarah, with various members of the committee leading up to this meeting, in between our last meeting and this meeting, and heard those sorts of goals. So I want to take this as a time to remind ourselves that that very much holds true. So, per a suggestion that started in the last meeting, I wanted to start with centering this meeting with the definition of equity that's used by the board, or by the school district, that really gets to the heart of the process. We're trying to look at the budget and understand that it happens. So with the definition of educational equity within the document, within the policy, says educational equity means raising the achievement of all students while narrowing the gaps between the lowest and high performance students and eliminating the racial predictability and disproportionality of which student groups occupy the highest and lowest achievement categories. So as we try to sit together today and figure out how we're going to organize our response to the budget and the things we want to call out as highlights and that we greatly celebrate to the board, and the things which we consider either missing or potentially deficiencies that we want to reinforce more attention on, I want to make sure that everybody is bringing their own experiences, but using that common lens of what we're trying to achieve. Yeah, Brad asked me to bring that about. As a matter of fact, I can go ahead and actually, I think I can present. So I'll go ahead and present. All right. And let me see if I can make this big enough. So it's this bit here. Hopefully folks can see that. So it says, educational equity means raising the achievement of all students, while one, narrowing the gaps between the lowest and highest performing students, and two, eliminating the racial predictability and disproportionality of which student groups occupy the highest and lowest achievement categories. So those are kind of three different pieces all in there that I'm hoping we can all focus our attentions, because there's so much in here, and as we've talked about before, the budget is a giant document and we can really only affect fairly small pieces of it. And we all have, the wonderful part about this group is that it represents the communities and the perspectives of such a diverse section of the school population, how do we bring those all to bear to really say, are we doing the right things to bring about these changes in equity with as best as we can as a district within this document and in partnership with the board? So before we dig into kind of what's to come in the meat of the meeting after this, I want to take a couple minutes to open up discussion to folks about this equity lens and what we've been doing so far, and what people really feel like. Is there something that folks would like to say, and how do we want to dig in today? If no, that is totally okay. Are there any concerns about? Oh yes, I can copy and paste into chat. And then as a reminder, this is from, it's from this particular document. Let me get some extraneous bits out there. Okay. Oh, that's copying and pasting a bunch of stuff. It was just that first part of it. Sorry. No, I guess that'll all work. Okay, so to bring this back, before we move on, I want to make sure that I don't want to take a lot of time in it, rehashing kind of what we went through last week. Some particular parts have come up on the mailing list this week. I want to call out Brad and say thank you very much for bringing some of the map data in particular to our attention, and Arena for helping kind of distill some of that down into the things that she feels like really get at some of the heart of where we're doing well and where we may need to focus a lot more effort and attention. Like, those are exactly the sorts of things that I think this committee does and can do very well. And so I want to make sure that if there are any concerns, things that people are feeling are holding them back from digging in with each other to make that happen today, I want to offer up this time to just clearly and openly and honestly listen to one another, while acknowledging that we need to move forward together today. Okay, well then I will get at it.
Judah, I believe
Yeah.
Roger raised his hand.
Oh, I think that was still up, but I could be wrong.
Oh.
Did you just raise your hand, Roger?
I just did.
Oh, okay. I missed that. Thank you.
I think it's fair that we do a deep dive as to how the budget carries out this policy. But I think we ought to make the acknowledgement this is an ongoing effort that has spanned decades by the district. My own memory is that in the early 60s, 1960s, long before some of you were born, but the district engaged in what was known at that time as the Model School Program, that was trying to deal with de facto segregation, and the district touted resources, bringing the teacher-student ratio to 1 to 11, but the wraparound services were counted as part of the staffing, and therefore classrooms still had 28 or to 35 students in it, and so on. Then I mentioned last meeting there were SIP grants that back when I was PTSA president at Franklin, I became aware of that there was at least 2 high schools in the district that had received $1 million grants to deal with these same kinds of problems and so on. So what we're doing now is laudatory, and I think it's the correct way to be going. But I think it's a part of an ongoing effort that has spanned many decades.
I actually think that strikes me as something that would be good to also consider including in our letter, like acknowledging our place in a something that we are not going to solve this week. This but it doesn't mean that we can't work really hard to make it better. So Brad had a suggestion in the chat about opening up to people comment on the definition of equity and potential concerns with that. So I think that's a fantastic idea. One thing I will say while people are pondering that, that came up in a conversation I had during the week, which was when reviewing this definition, like feeling a little bit sad that it only explicitly calls out racial equity as a specific type of equity under the educational equity, and that we have to, also understand that there are a great many lenses through which we need to look at equity, with racial equity certainly being a very strong one, and that over time perhaps it's important for the district to really make sure that we're encompassing a variety of lenses when looking at equity. Yeah, Renee?
I'm not, I didn't want to comment on the definition, but I do want to comment on the work session that we attended last week. Mm-hmm. Or was that this week? It was last week. I don't know. Tuesday. Yes. Whatever day it was. I did want to comment on the fact that on paper, and listening to the board, that it does look like they are addressing equity. The schools that need the most help had more money. They have equity funds. I'm pleased, but I have to tell you folks that I was overwhelmed because this document right here, this is a lot. So I did learn a lot at the work session and listening to you, but this was a lot for me. But I'm going to try to get better at it. Sarah, I'm sending you an email. I need tutoring over the summer. But I was pleased with what I saw. And Claire really helps because she breaks it down for us at the meetings. So I just wanted to say that. So thank you, Claire, also.
You're more than welcome.
I do want to say in supporting that trying to make the budget itself and the budget process much more engageable to a variety of people who don't spend all their time down in accounting land has been something that we've commented on and worked on as a committee a number of times over the years. And I hear what you're saying, Renee, and have been in that very same place. So I think that is very much worth us digging back into, because it's gotten better, honestly, than it was, but there needs to be a lot more. So yes, Lisa, I saw you, I think, raise your hand first.
I was just going to echo some of what Renee was saying in that trying to dig in as a new member on the committee and really trying to figure out, are we meeting the goals? And when we're talking about equity, I think the equity distribution and the schools that are receiving the additional positions is great. But I also want to comment, I think Sarah had provided some comments on the annual review from last year, and really needing some more information on what the specific programs are at the schools that support this would be really helpful, I think, not only for this budget committee, but for the public to know what the school district is doing. It's really hard to look at this document and know what that is. And I think it would be really helpful. I think in a side conversation, someone had mentioned that, this is the moral document and what we're standing behind. And I think it would really validate what the school district has committed to by having that additional information in there, or as a subsequent. I believe there's a report that comes out every year supporting the racial equity and social justice. But when I looked online, the only thing I could find was from back in 2018, 2019. So maybe that's something that we can resurface heading into next year, but kind of supporting what Renee and then Sarah had provided and side comments of, I think that would really add to the document in talking about equity. So.
Just so folks know, I'm taking my own little notes to make some bullet points as these issues come up, and trying to grab some from the chat as well, because this will form the basis of our response letter to the board. Things we're doing really well, things that we feel like really need additional effort, and that can very much encompass the process as well as the actual budget itself. So please keep these coming. I am putting them in there for us to work with. So Roger, I see your hand up.
Thank you. I only wanted to observe and compliment Claire and her staff. Over the years, the budget document has become more user-friendly, as incredible as that might seem to say, but when I first came on this committee, boy, oh boy, and largely the format of our required entries are dictated by the state, and so there's we have engaged in previous years in working with the district in developing an executive summary that is user-friendly to audience, but basically boils down to 4 or 5 pages, 6 pages, a document that explains the whole process. I'll also point out we had a co-chair of this committee that it wasn't until the 3rd year that she began to be able to translate the acronyms. And that's one of the reasons why I constantly harp on the subject of you spell it out first and before you start using it. So anyway, that has nothing to do with the evaluation of the current document, but just thought I'd point that out.
I think you just raised your hand again, Roger. I assume like that. All right, cool. Sarah.
Thanks, Judah, and thanks everyone for all these super helpful comments and reflections. I think this is setting ourselves up nicely for the quick work we have to do to arrive at a report that we can all stand behind. I wanted to just lift up one, I don't know if it's a point or just thing for us to think about as we work through this review as it relates to equity. I think the equity allocations are super important as one mechanism for sort of checking whether or not the district is in fact, allocating resources to schools and to students who have demonstrated the most need for them. And so I want to push us, and I don't have the answers to all of this, and I know we have to work really quickly, but to think about where else we would expect investments in closing racial equity gaps to show up. And so as you all were talking, I was thinking of a few places, and I think based on my initial review, which I don't know how great of a tutor I'm going to be. I mean, I think we all still sort of struggle for the reasons we've articulated through this budget document. And I do think we should continue to push on ways in which we can both engage the community in the development of the budget and presenting it in a format that's easy to understand for the layperson who doesn't have time to sort of pour over it in detail. But I think there are things like, investments in mental health and wellness this year, which I know are increasing in ways that I'm really pleased with. Understanding how those will be distributed. How will the impacts of those mental health and wellness investments be felt by students, and where and in what ways? Things like curriculum, right? There's a big, I think, set of investments around curriculum material and instructional materials, and accelerating some of the work that we've been trying to do for a long time to make sure that we're using materials that are not 25 years old. And so how are those investments, right, substantial enough? Are they fast enough to make sure that every student in our district has access to a high quality curriculum that's sort of culturally, competent is not the right word, but, culturally relevant and sustaining, I think, is the term that district often uses. How are we supporting teachers, right? So there's a lot of work that goes into just making sure that the curriculum is, comes to life in ways that are meaningful and equitable. So where in the budget can we look to make sure that teachers are well supported, that school principals who have a lot of discretion over this are well supported? And then the last thing that was sort of bubbling up in my mind was around hiring. We've talked a lot about, in the district, I think, has invested a lot of resources in increasing and prioritizing, diversifying the educator workforce. Where are the central office resources that I think we need to see to believe that will actually happen? And I'm not saying they aren't in here, but those are, I think, another set of things that might be worth us looking for as evidence of the district in, sort of walking the talk as it relates to equity. So the allocations are one thing, but I think there are some other places that we should push ourselves to look to. And those are just a few that came to mind. And I wonder if, as we're having this conversation, there are other places that you all think we should be looking for in terms of specific examples where we're either seeing evidence of investments being made equitably, or we don't see the evidence and therefore have questions.
And just so folks know, as I'm taking these notes, I'm trying my best to summarize them as we collect these things and then come back around to try and distill them into a more coherent set of points. I'll put them all out in front of people so that we can wordsmith them together and make sure they're accurately reflected what I sometimes half-assedly attempted to summarize your point as. So thank you, and for being patient with me. We will come back around to these. And actually, Claire just pointed. I want to get back to Arena, who's next, but Claire just pointed to a new document on budget priorities. Oh, I did see this, but I have not read it. So that may be instructive for us as part of this. So I will set that aside for myself. Okay. And Arena.
So can I just add, I added a second one. I'm sorry to interrupt. It is also, staff went through and did a RESJ lens analysis of our budget development for 21-22. And so I wanted to make sure you had seen that as well, especially since you're working to look at equity in particular. I thought that might be helpful to you.
Thank you. Is this the document that somebody was pointing out, the response about, this is how we are applying the ResJ lens, that they had said they had only seen from 2018, 2019? Is this an updated version of that?
This was shared at the community budget session on Tuesday night. Danny Ledesma, our senior advisor for racial equity and social justice work, has worked with staff that did budget development for 21-22. We shared that our work in terms of running through the ResJ lens. Noberto did a lot of that work, as a matter of fact. And so I just want to make sure, because you're having the equity conversation in particular, I want to make sure that you know that staff has been using that in the budget development process.
Yeah, and happy to talk a little bit. I just happened to see the comments. But yeah, it's essentially, so right. We talk about racial equity and social justice as a framework, but then as you apply it, it forces you to think about it through different contexts. And like the conversation I had, that I worked through with Danny Ledesma and Dr. Russ Brown and with the rest of SLT is, how do we start thinking about it in actionable terms? And really as this evolving work, I think, Roger, as you were talking about, since the 1960s and so forth. And so then, right, like thinking about the evolution of the work and where we want to get to with using this tool, knowing that there's a strategic plan being worked on that will be presented to the board on June 15th, is what I like to think about, like logic models. So like a clear example is we talk about raising graduation rates for our Native students. So, right, that's an outcome. And then what are like the leading indicators that we need to keep track of and be mindful of as part of racial equity and social justice, but also as we start thinking about metrics. So maybe chronic absenteeism, maybe third grade reading or something along those lines. And then it forces us to also start thinking, well, then if that's a leading indicator or an item that we'll be tracking, how then are we investing in those respective indicators? And so, right, we start getting into this conversation about aligning resources to support leading indicators, because if we focus on the outcome, by then it's too late, right? Kids have already graduated. So how do we get ahead of it? And right, it's not like this one moment in time conversation, starting to like put the work together and think about all these different elements. So as we have these conversations, it definitely resonates. So Sarah, as you mentioned, what are the other things we're thinking about, or how this shows up in other areas? There's countless possibilities. So by starting to focus and formulate logic models, it can help create some discipline, because like I'll say this with folks who, right, you interact from a budget perspective, and it's like, hey, it's like two things. We can do anything, but we can't do everything. And then like it's a pie, not a well, right? When we think about the resources. So it's like, it forces us to then have those trade-off conversations. And it's like, well, you know what? If our metrics and logic models point us in this direction, what are then those trade-off conversations we need to have, whatever it may be, right? And regardless of whether you're on this side or that side, but it goes back to starting to have those conversations aligned to specific frameworks. And it's like, just right as we start thinking about what the next few years can look like, it's something that I personally enjoy. And so I'm looking forward to diving deeper over the next few months.
Thank you, Noberto. Anything you wanted to add to that, Claire, before we move on to Irina?
I think that we've had hands up for a long time, and I've spoken enough tonight.
Fair. Okay, thank you. Irina.
What I wanted to mention about the equity and the budget, what was said yesterday that I really enjoyed from yesterday board input, that the summer program, the summer investment the federal funds that are not in the budget. But this federal funds supposed to be spent in such way that we can implement the budget that our budget team prepared. So these funds are supposed to make our students who completely got disengaged during this COVID year to get back into mood to study. So we are handpicking for the summer the kids who are especially lacking behind and bringing them back to the level where they have to be by the start of the new school year. And in my book, this is the best equity money you can spend. And this is kind of like also the direction how the federal fund money were intended. So we are kind of like really doing a good job. And we definitely need to write it down in our report, but it's not really budgeting. But it's the money that are helping budget to be intended and to be used how it's supposed to be. So think how we are going to word it. I hope you understand what I'm saying.
I'm doing my best to write it down right now, and then we will go over it together to make sure it comes out in the spirit intended. Okay, Brad, you've had your hand up. You're muted, Brad. Oh. Ah, okay.
While we wait for him to type, do we have another hand?
Nope.
No. While we wait for Brad to type that in, I was just going to type in something, but I can say it instead as we're waiting for him. I was going to say, Edie, and I totally understand your points, and I do think they belong in our report. The board, I was just going to remind us all that the board they had asked 3 specific questions that came. I think we shared them ahead of last week's meeting. One specifically invited CBRC perspective on on how the district is proposing to spend federal relief dollars. And so I think this is a clear example of what the district is planning to invest, right? The learning acceleration work that you described is a clear example of how PPS is planning to spend some of those federal COVID relief dollars. And so I 100% think it belongs in our report, even if it's, it is a different funding stream, but it's all sort of being brought and braided together in service of supporting students, this summer and next school year. So I don't think there are any concerns or that it's out of scope for us to include that in our report.
Yeah. Can I add something? Okay.
Yes, please.
One concern I guess I had just around, I love the targeted engagement, trying to target certain populations of students who are disengaged, students who really need this accelerated learning. One concern I guess I have just with that, I feel like it's definitely is a positive one. I guess negative side effect is we did the same thing for Lippy and we saw varying results across the district. So we had some schools, great, targeted engagement worked super well. Other schools, people didn't respond to emails or just they didn't want to participate. So I'm wondering how, and it doesn't have to be answered, I'm just wondering how we make sure that all of our funding is going towards students and we don't have empty classes, basically.
I think it's a great point, and I think a hard one for us to, doesn't mean we shouldn't address it in our report. I think it's hard because we're then veering into, it's sort of, here's what we're planning to do, and you sort of have to assume good implementation and that everything will go right and all the supports are in place. I 100% agree that that's a big risk of any right? Like, especially this summer, we've got exhaustion and sort of demoralization on so many levels. I think on the student level, the family level, getting, the targeted students to participate is not going to be easy across the board for reasons you articulated. And then I think that I have a whole set of questions and concerns just around staffing and support that staff will need to do this well, given the realities confronting teachers right now and what we know about, again, exhaustion, not just like burnout, but demoralization, right? Like their professional values have been really pushed to the limit, I think, over the past year. And so there are, I think, a set of valid questions about making sure the resources are there to to get the students that we want to participate there, to support staff, leading the work. I think there's a big push to partner with a lot of the culturally specific community organizations in ways that I'm hopeful will lead to higher participation and support for, not just for, and bring in additional staffing, but I 100% think you have the right set of questions, Jackson, right now. And you should help us figure out the right way to raise them in the report.
Yeah, I'd like to echo what Jackson said. I generally do support sort of additional learning, but as Jackson mentioned, it's been incredibly difficult getting the students that we would target to engage. I don't know unless I was confident that funding was going to be put to good use, necessarily supporting that. But I think as an idea, I'm all for it. And if it can be done effectively, I'm definitely all for it. But I think there are some very unique challenges.
Okay, great. I want to call out, since we don't, okay, actually, Brad's hand is still up. I want to make sure we address
Judah, sorry,
his question there. Okay.
Hey, Judah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so the
Got
people,
your
at the last, the people at the last meeting that raised the biggest concern don't seem to be part of this meeting this evening. And I'm wondering, are we concerned that they're not on this call right now? And, kind of what, some of the stuff, that was said at the last meeting. Is there some additional things that need to be, that we need to reach out to certain people, or are we concerned with the makeup of who's on this call?
Let's see, who are we missing today? Because certainly having everyone's voice represented is important. We got an email from Jennifer Samuels saying that she wasn't going to be able to make tonight's meeting, but is going to watch the recording. And then Sarah specifically reached out to her and reminded her that we'll be working on our suggestions. So, and to make sure that she gets them, into us, and that we reflect them in the document. And then I think Alana had to step out for a bit, but she just came back. And then I think that we have everyone else.
Are we missing Alicia?
I was just looking and don't see her. Yes, sorry. Yep, there we go. We are, yeah.
Good call.
That's correct.
So
Brad, maybe you can say a little bit more about, specifically about concerns about sort of advancing and moving and having this conversation that we're having right now, which I don't think we can wait on given the timing of the report. But maybe you can say a bit more about why you're sort of raising this about the absences.
Well, there was a lot of concern, and I think that it kind of side railed the meeting, and I think we need to have a very different conversation if we're going to look at some of the materials that were presented, the things that I sent out today, specifically that map presentation. PPS has good reason to be very proud of some of those numbers in there. The learning loss for students was nowhere near as horrible as everybody thought it was going to be. Norberto and Claire, I don't know if you were the ones that decided to use the exclamation points on page 14 and 15 of that presentation, but obviously the district was pleased with some of the reading results and how kids did, at certain levels. I think, trying to look at those sorts of things and trying to figure out, did kids do, I guess it's easy to say that, COVID has created this cliff and everything is just absolutely horrible. I see very positive things to read into that map data. Specifically that, for good or bad, we were able to teach kids, through digital means without having ever done it before. And I think that's something that we need to look at calling out in the report. It wasn't easy, but staff did it. Where I think we got sidetracked at the last meeting is some kids, did well, with that online learning. And I was asking what happens for those kids? What happens for kids that are, at grade level, and what are happening for kids, that were totally disconnected, the ones that we have not reached at all. I would like to reach all students at PPS. I think that's one of the things that we need to do. And I'm very pleased with the definition for equity that we came up with, because I see all, kids mentioned in there. I think we need to look at reports like that, and we need to use data rather than just, kind of people's opinions or other things. Norberto and Claire, maybe you guys could speak to that map presentation. The detail, the disaggregated data. I love data, and I read through the thing that Dr. Brown sent out. There's a lot in there. There are some classifications where if you get two more people taking it, you're going to influence that thing one way or the other, significantly. Maybe you guys, though, could speak to that map presentation data and tell us what your guys' biggest takeaway, I guess specifically with the, the exclamation points on page 14 and 15. And thanks.
So for me, the biggest takeaway is our students did better in reading, and we have our work to do in terms of math. That's my takeaway in a nutshell. But I don't have the report in front of me, and I don't know, Norberto, if you do, where you can see page 14 and 15.
Not yet. I don't have it right in front of me, but to Claire's point, I would add the other aspect was considering the pandemic and like the comparison of participations from last year to this year, and like to your point, Brad, 2 extra students or whatnot. So there was still like this opportunity, and I wouldn't necessarily go as far as saying opportunity, but for this year, but an opportunity for next year to continue that assessment with understanding with what the results could look like with a bigger population or a population of participants. So yeah, that was one thing that was just considering the circumstances, it's great data.
But I think also the data was, Dr. Brown mentions it in that, in that disaggregated data. He's able to, you're able to look at the data and say, okay, the kids that didn't take it from last year, we can accurately predict how they would have done in, this year's data. There's a lot of, stuff where, for good or bad, the districts has been taking standardized tests for a long time, right? All districts have. They're able to use that data and then predict what's going to happen. And that report does that. It's easy to dismiss, that there wasn't, the highest participation level. Actually, in reading, it was a higher participation level. But even though that there wasn't as many, people that were, necessarily participating in it, you can then accurately predict. And he puts it in there. You can guess, you can statistically predict how those kids were doing. And that's what he's doing through all that, through that entire report. So it's not that, we missed it. By and large, kids did pretty good on reading. We didn't do as good on math. And that seems to be pretty clear if you look throughout the entire nation. That's kind of the general thing. 5 months ago, we thought everybody was just, not learning anything. And now we're starting to realize, wait a minute, this actually kind of worked. Kids learned something throughout this. And that's what I got out of that. And what I was hoping to get, last week and through this is that not the takeaway I should take from that map presentation? Anytime there's exclamation points, I assume that it's important. So. Are we still not able to find that data, Gilberto?
I have the report, but you mentioned page 14. I wanted to make sure I was looking at the right information, and for some reason I can't find the exclamation marks.
And this isn't the one from Dr. Brown. This is the one that was the map presentation one.
Oh, that's why, because I was looking through the memo.
Well, and that was the only one that was sent out to this, CBRC was the map presentation one. The memo is one that we sent out today.
Ah, got it. Yeah.
So maybe why Noberto's looking for the other file, that I think there's a couple more hands up.
Yes. And we can totally come back around to that because I don't want to spend too much time digging into math, though, even though I love it, as I don't want to get us lost in the weeds. So, yeah, Irina.
About Dr. Brown presentation, he mentioned that 700 students, or maybe 780 students took the MAP test. So it was the test kind of like self-selected. People who knew that they're going to do well, they took the test. And that's why it's so important to do something during summer for the kids who didn't take the MAP test because they knew that they're going to do really bad. And another thing that was also mentioned, that this summer session is also going to be a professional development for our teachers. So the principal who is in charge of this program said that she's going to use it as an incubator. There was this fancy word used, that they're going to test the innovative approach. They're going to use different subjects, merge them together, and have some kind of like innovative, hands-on approach. And they're really working hard, at least that's what she was saying, right now, reaching to the parents, reaching to the communities, convincing these kids who are disengaged to come and during summer and catch up on whatever they missed during the year. And they're thinking that they're going to find out ways, whatever our student representatives are worried, that the LIPI experience is not going to happen, that they're going to use different methods during summer and make these kids to get back to where they're supposed to be. Okay, that's it from me.
Thank you. Jackson?
Yeah, just a quick question. I wanted to follow up. I know during the board meeting when we originally got presented the MAP testing, there was a question around whether we have shifted funding for the accelerated learning during the summer to focus more on math, since we see that that's kind of like there's lacking, I guess, performance in that area or needs more support. I'm just wondering if we have kind of just.
So they're selecting students that need, the most supports. And so I imagine they're designing the accelerated learning around what the student needs are. So not necessarily, math for everybody, although it might be math for everybody, right? I don't know that, but I know that they're being very thoughtful about teacher recommended students and what they need. So I know they're planning around based on their current teacher's recommendation of what supports would help them.
Okay, I guess that makes more sense.
Okay. Sarah's got there are a couple questions in there that I'm trying to also take notes on. So Sarah, you want to bring up your question out loud, and Lisa as well. That way I can get notes going.
Sure. Can you all hear me okay? There we go.
Yes.
I have my video off because I have what feels like a newborn child at home. It's a puppy who's, I think, harder than a newborn child. So anyone who has a pandemic puppy, I know, share the joy and the pain. I think the point that I was making is less about interpretation of the map data, but just an acknowledgement of the limitations of what it can and can't tell us. And I think Dr. Brown would probably agree, right? Like that yes, it's a representative sample and it helps paint a picture of, where students across the district are in terms of growth in reading and math. It doesn't tell us, right, about course failure rates. I'm happy to put links into national data that have emerged about, painting a really grim picture. And I'd be surprised if somehow Portland would be out there. Just failure rates in general and what that means about students' trajectories toward on-time graduation as one potential lagging indicator. So, cell measures, just how are students doing, right? I think if you ask, any parent right now, it's, really wanting to be tapped into just students, mental health and wellness in general, right? Like, I don't think we have data at our fingertips to help us understand better than anecdotally how students are doing, and among all students, which students are suffering the greatest impacts in terms of mental health and wellness. So I think while I agree that we can and should lift up the map results in some way, I think it's important as a committee that we acknowledge the limitations and that they're one set of data and don't paint a complete picture of what the experiences students are having in our district right now.
So 2 pieces there. One is I know that the credit recovery component of the work is right after school ends, so that we can catch students as they haven't completed a course and really make it so that they have an opportunity to finish the pieces they need to complete the course. So they're really, I know our high school staff are looking at that and planning for that. So in terms of, they're hoping to make it so kids will be able to make up that work quickly before they've lost the learning that they had for the part of the course that they completed. And then also,
I think we lost Claire.
Yeah, such a spicy take, it knocked her offline. So,
As she would say, she always blames her country internet.
yes.
and it is, it keeps knocking me out. I'm sorry. The other piece is later this month, we'll have the Panorama Education, the climate surveys for schools that will be, available. It's just not yet. It's coming in the next couple of weeks. First principals, then in staff, and then principals will share with families, and there'll be a board presentation as well. So not in time for this report, but it's coming soon.
Right. I mean, and that just makes it that much harder, I think, to do our jobs as a committee, because yes, I totally agree. Those data points would be really valuable, right, to help address some of the questions that I just raised and I think others share. And the timeline is such that they just won't have any bearing, right, on whatever comments we can make, which I don't know what, there's not an immediate, I think, set of things we could do, right? We can't make the reports appear, earlier. And certainly at this point, it's far too late, right? We've got to produce a report in the next 48 hours or so. But for future years, I think, going back to a lot of comments I've heard this committee make around performance measures and, having data to help us understand whether the investments are in fact aligned with need. Like, it might be something for us to take up in the future, just kind of right sizing the availability and timelines for some of these data that would be really useful, I think, to have.
I appreciate the sentiment, and I have been attending these meetings for 3 years, and I've heard this voiced each year, and each year we're getting closer and closer. And I know that it's still not where we want it to be, but we know that it's needed. And I know that it will be better in each again this next year, but I I totally agree with the sentiment and look forward to having all that data myself as well.
Can I just say before we move off this topic, and I know I'm taking up too much of your time, the idea, the theory of action that these reports are shared and the way that they're shared and eventually make their way into the hands of parents is not the reality, I don't think, across the board. I can only speak from my personal experience, but we've had to like fight, and this is not knocking our school principal. I think he's wonderful for so many reasons, but we don't get the data presented to us or opportunity to discuss them in any meaningful or timely way. So I think there's an opportunity to think about the delivery chain for that report and check some of the assumptions that are made about how it's rolled out and then shared with the broader school communities. Again, that's my experience. I can't speak to others. And of one,
I think that's a relevant point, and I think that it would be something that could be in a report that you value the different assessments, and as a CBRC member and a parent, you value the multiple methods of how we're evaluating how we're doing. So I appreciate that, and I think that I would encourage you to include that in your report.
And I'll just add, Sarah, what you said made me think of what Lisa has advocated for as well regarding like some of the like what's happening at schools. And I've worked at, and I think about how opportunities for us to continue to showcase some of the great things that happen at schools. And it takes, some work, and obviously I'm still getting to know our system, and I've worked at other places where you go to the website and you can see all the programs and at a school site and how they're being funded. So it's like going back to opportunities, it's how we consider our resources, and then so that parents and folks can be engaged as to what's happening. And believe me, I have not looked at all of our websites, so maybe some of that is happening. But and if it is, right, how do we create awareness? So I think there's some opportunities there.
Thank you. I want to make sure we don't get off track. And just as a time check, we have roughly an hour left in this. And, I'm willing to stay a little bit later, but I want to make sure we're trying to stay on track as much as possible so we put ourselves in a good place.
Hey, Judah, could we have Norberto just show pages 14 and 15 of that map presentation thing, just so we can all look at it?
Yeah, I'm going to wait on that in just a moment because Lisa raised her hand before that came up. So I'd like to acknowledge that, and then we can come back around to that.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of circle back, kind of bring us back to when we're talking about MAP and coming back to the board goals and thinking that maybe we could talk about and coming back to our letter and our substantiating that the board and the school district is meeting the goals, and that and maybe you're going to lead the discussion from here, but I kind of wanted to bring us back to our job at hand here, which is, does this budget support the 4 goals? And, maybe I'll go back to you, Judah, but kind of wanting to, I think we need to move on to what we're supposed to be doing tonight, which is verifying that this budget meets those goals and then our equity objectives. So I kind of just wanted to steer back to that.
Okay, thank you. So yes, so Brad, if you think that's helpful, I'm happy to have Norberto share and make sure that we're getting out of that the information you wanted to highlight. And let's make sure we're able to kind of bring it, as Lisa said, to bear on the discussion today.
Yeah, sure, totally. Norberto, are you able to share?
Yes. I say yes. Let's see if Google Meets cooperates. And I'm looking because obviously I have like 2,000 tabs open. There. Are you able to see the map presentation?
Yes, I think
Yes.
we're able to see page 15, but not 14. Maybe if you could scroll up.
All right, let me see. Maybe it'll have to be one at a time because I don't know if it gets too small for you guys. So this is page 14. And if I need to make this bigger, let me know.
And I think if you could go to page 15 then. And I think, Alberto, this was presented to the board, right?
Correct. Yes.
Did the board share the district's like belief that this performance was clearly better than what had been expected?
I don't know. Claire, I don't necessarily recall the feedback conversation. Generally, it seems like a big blur. I felt it was received positively, but Claire, I don't know if
I would
you have
guess-
more specific.
Well, I guess a better question is this the position of the district that the performance was clearly better than what had been expected?
Yes, that's Dr. Russ Brown's presentation, and that's his
Maybe
his wording.
maybe for everybody, what's his position?
Chief of System Performance, so he does all of the metrics, and he does a lot of research and statisticians. He has a team that reports to him that does most of the work that you're asking for.
But he would be the best person in the district to make this type of a determination?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
And I think that's encouraging. We need to listen to people that are the experts on something like this. And that's what I was trying to bring up last week. Obviously, this is something that the district is very proud of. And that's why I was focused on there's not one exclamation point, there's two here, right? This is something that, the district, I feel, should be rightly proud of. I mean, this is good. I mean, this is showing that we were able to totally switch how we did stuff to teach kids. And for a lot of kids, it worked. And for the kids that didn't take the test, it's in that disaggregated data, how he's measuring those things. And my takeaway from this is that there were things, we may not like it. We may not like having to stay at home with our kids. We may not like, everything, but our teachers and our schools and everybody stepped up, did a job where actually we got better results than we expected on tests. And that's what I see in this report, and then also in that disaggregated data. And I was trying to figure that out last week before we got, derailed. And that's what I was trying to find out. Is that the takeaway I should be having? I mean, obviously that's almost exactly what he's saying. So
I'm going to speak to that, Brad, in kind of three parts. One part is I don't, so once again, like it is part of our process where we do want to call out what should be celebrated. And I think that if your point is that we had to massively adapt as a system, and that we, the results that we're seeing, to the extent that we have them here, have been surprising, and that we've done better, that we should recommend, that we should call that out and celebrate that, as a positive. And I don't know that I have heard anyone on the CBRC or anywhere else dispute that. Is that kind of the crux of the point?
last week we weren't even able to get into this, and this was something that was presented to all CBRC members,
yes,
as materials before, and I would have expected everybody to have read this.
Yes,
but somehow we, the conversation devolved into something very, very different last week. Taking this, because what we have decided, what we've done is we're going to look at these 4 metrics, and those are going to be based on testing as well. We can say that we're, uncomfortable with the testing, but the testing happened, And it seems to be positive in some ways and not as positive in other ways.
Yes.
But those 4 things, 3rd grade reading, 8th grade, things, those are all based on standardized testing. It's not whether or not we think things are going okay. Those things are anchored in standardized testing, right? Those things,
Yes.
those pieces of the student portrait. For us as a CBRC to dismiss that, I think is not, is not looking at the whole picture. Testing took place. We may not agree with the results, but it doesn't mean that we get to ignore it. And I think going forward, we are going to have to look at more of the testing. That's what, what we've agreed as a committee that we are going to be looking at. That's what the board has said. Okay. We're going to be doing this, based on these metrics. And I think if we're going to continue to be anchored in those things, we need to look at this report, because this is it. We don't have any other data that's come from the district in the form of testing to meet those, portraits of the, the student graduate. So.
Okay. So we can dig more deeply into this, but I personally, so just respond to a couple parts of that. Number one is, I do not feel that the conversation necessarily devolved. I want to call that out and be like, there's a difference between that versus not going in the direction that you wanted. So I do want to make sure that we're opening this up into an understanding that there's a variety of perspectives, both, yes, on whether the testing is a good idea, or not, but really like that we can base our entire report essentially on one piece of data, which is this test. And so I felt like there were a number of salient points brought from different perspectives. And so I don't feel comfortable just calling it devolving away from what should have been done. I'm open to listening to, other approaches, but I'm hearing what you're saying, that we want to be data driven. This is the data we have. And so we want to call out the good things. But what is the response to this particular budget here? So you're saying that the investments that this budget makes, based off of what you see in, say, this slide, are you saying that the investments are appropriate? Are there investments you think would be better justified based on this data that are not being made? What is, I'm still not seeing where you are trying to take this point.
So I think if we look at those 4 points, for the student, the portrait of the student graduate, there's the 3rd grade and the 8th grade, and there is people that are at certain levels. We can go back and look at the specific document. This is the only place that we have any sort of data. We haven't come up with any other sort of metrics that we're going to use. This is all we have for what we've decided so far that we're going to evaluate the budget on. That's why I think it's so important. I don't know where there is any other data, because all of that data was very specifically percentage driven. It was, we're going to move from this percentage to this percentage. We're going to move from this percentage to this percentage. And I think that's, if we're going to write it, if we're going to say that we're going to base it on those guidelines, we're going to say that we're going to base it on what the board is coming up with. The board has come up with, it was, 45 to 60%, or it was 44 to 60%. That's what we need to look at, until we come up with a different set of criteria. And I haven't seen us come up with a different set of criteria. So that's why I wanted to highlight this report, because this is the place that has the data that we have decided up to this point that we're going to base our report on. And if I'm missing something, I'm totally happy for somebody else to tell me that.
Elon, I was going to invite you to speak up to sort of give voice to your point that you just made, if you feel okay doing that. And then the only other quick thing I was going to say in response, Brad, to your point is that, the board, the 4 board goals, 2 of them are based on MAP and 2 are based on other measures. So I just want to, like, for the purposes of everyone being on the same page, I think it's important to know that yes, there are two measures in there: the 5th grade math and 3rd grade reading goals that are based on MAP, but the 8th grade graduate portrait and the post-secondary readiness, ready for college and career goals are based on different data, which, as we've discussed previously, we're in a sort of a unusual year and circumstances where we have gaps in some of our ability to collect those data, especially around the SBAC. So I just want to factually get us all on the same page. Ilana, did you want to jump in, or?
I I don't think that I necessarily need to, because I think I just reiterate what you and Judah have already said. But I will be happy to have more of a further conversation about the data.
So I was just going to propose, Sarah, you've got them in front of you. I'm trying to find them amongst all my documents. The board goals that we're trying to support through the document. I have too many PDFs, so I apologize.
Let's put it in the chat.
Yeah. Okay. So this would be helpful, and because this is what Brad is referring to. With the 3rd grade reading, 5th grade mathematics, 8th grade graduate portrait, and post-secondary readiness. So, for instance, I believe it was looking at my notes because I have too many tabs open. There was discussion about grades versus that were in the and passing rates versus the MAP assessments and such. That speaks to some of the things that that are in this, but not others. And the MAP data speaks to some of the issues, but not the others. So there are a variety of items in here that, and not all of them can be discussed with the 3rd grade with the just the MAP data. But I'm still trying to get at the earlier question that I had. So let's just take this as an example, because I do want to engage Brad and make sure that I understand the direction you're trying to take. So let's say 3rd grade reading. It calls out in the board goals that we want to close achievement gaps, and it specifically says in there, to close achievement gaps, we must accelerate growth for our underserved students of color, moving from 44% of our underserved students of color meeting growth to 60% meeting or exceeding growth expectations, as measured by MAP by the spring of 2022. So there's a very specific goal, and like you called out, that is something that is addressed in the data that we were given, with limitations, but it's in there. So how would you want to take that data, this goal, and apply the two against our budget, the proposed budget, and respond to it in our letter?
Well, I think we all need to come to like some sort of an understanding. Is that thing that we're looking at in the link in the notes, is that what we're trying to write our letter based on?
With the
thing that Sarah posted at 722, is that what we're trying to write our letter to? And I think we need to get all on board as to what we're trying to write a letter to. My understanding is that is what we were trying to do. And if that's not the case, then I'm looking for somebody to tell me, something different.
That is certainly part of it. I would say that we also have, if you go and look at our section on the PPS site, Community Budget Review Committee, we've got 6 documents there, none of which is actually the board goals, but we've got 6 documents there, and includes both our charter and it includes the budget of principles adopted by the board. And so if you look, for instance, at the budget principles adopted by the board in there, the recommendations that we put in, which we have historically used as our primary lens when evaluating these budgets. And Roger can speak to this. He's brought it up a number of times. He was part of the documenting of this, the formulation of this, and it being adopted by the board, which is about our lens on it. You'll see a much broader purview than the four specific goals in the board goals. So, for instance, prioritizing the core program in all schools, critically re-examine the pattern of spending, providing every student with equitable access. So these are actually the budget principles that we adopted as a committee to respond to the proposed budget. But you're right, they should be in alignment with, like, taking as one of the lenses the goals that the board has for themselves. But for us and our particular lens and pathway lens, it's the budget principles document, the adopted budget principles document in our area on the PPS website.
Maybe you could, specifically share that out with everybody.
I just pasted the link.
Okay.
Yeah. So I have to grab some water. Sarah, if you wouldn't mind facilitating, and then it might be worthwhile taking a moment for us to all go through that. And Roger is available, I'm sure, for a discussion of why things are the way that they are here. And it's very worthwhile discussion to be had.
Thanks, Judah. Hand it right over to me at this crucial point of 30 minutes left in our meeting, and let's figure out the overall organizational structure and content. I love it. I do think, from my perspective, it would be really useful to take the remaining 30 minutes we have to do a couple of things. One, I do think, Brad, to your point, it is important for us to have consensus around how we want to organize this report. I think you all have had access to a document that Judah shared a couple of days ago. I will put it in the chat here. He shared a starting point for us to work off of as we craft this year's report. It essentially was last year's, the report we submitted last year, with some sort of introductory resources, some references for us to use as we consider this year's budget, and some considerations for how we might structure this year's letter. As you can see, Brad, last year we did, and you were a part of this, we did decide to structure, we organized our review around the 4 board goals, and then made a strategic decision, because we were operating with limited data, to sort of frame our remarks in 2 ways. One, a set of observations about the budget, which you have in front of you if you have that document that I just put in the chat open, and then a set of recommendations. So we could this year decide as a committee to organize our report the same way. Speaking of too many tabs, I lost you all for a second as I was tabbing over. There you are. We could decide to organize our report around is it 3 or 4, Judah, questions that the board specifically lifted up as inviting and really wanting CBRC feedback on?
There are 3, and I was not proposing we organize around it, but make sure that we are addressing areas that they particularly are seeking community input on, as we know that there's room for positive engagement.
Yep. So I think trying to quickly get to consensus just around, do we all feel good enough? Can we live with sort of organizing the structure of our report similar to the way we did last year, And then I was going to propose, Judah, that we use our remaining time to really try and crowdsource as much input as we can. I know we've been doing this a little bit, but just to make sure that we hear from everyone about kind of the key bullets that if you were going to sit in front of the board next week, you would want to make sure that we hit on. I think Judah and I, well, I won't speak for you, Judah, but I feel like this is the spirit of the conversation we had. We'll be the ones to, read the words out loud, but it's not me and Judah's report. This really does need to reflect the input of all of those of us who are participating in this conversation right now. And so I've gone through, as you all saw, and started to put notes in about, this doesn't feel relevant anymore. We should push on this. Here's what I think about this. We need that kind of input from all of you. And so one proposal we had was to actually just put 5-7 minutes on the clock and give everyone a chance to independently think about what you would find most important to say. If you were the one to deliver the report or sit in front of the board, what are the points that you feel like are most important for us to include, and sort of crowdsource as many of those as we can. And then we can go through a process of seeing where there's consensus, where there's disagreement, etc. So that is one proposal for how we use the remaining 25 minutes or so that we have. Part of it is just sort of silent, sustained thinking and sharing time. And I think we can just do that directly in the Google Doc we have open in the form of bullets if folks have access. And if folks don't have access, I think putting, your thoughts into the chat, we can copy them over in that way. I'm just worried that we don't have the luxury of time to sort of verbally invite everyone verbally to give their top 3 points and then discuss them all. So that's my proposal, and I'm curious what folks think about that. Or Judah, if you have anything different that you'd like to propose at this point. You shouldn't have given me the mic. If you totally
I really needed water.
That was a big risk.
I really needed water.
Sarah, I have one question.
Sure.
If we do that, it'll just be like 7 minutes where the live stream or people watching won't be able to see what we're doing. Would we be able to present the Google Doc that we're working on?
That's a great point. We could read them off. We could read them off. We could have everyone sort of type everything in and then sort of read them off in some way. But we were trying, I think, to honor the fact that some people think better with 5 minutes of quiet time versus just opening the floor for everyone to chime in. And then we hear from the louder voices, not necessarily everyone's perspective.
How about this as a compromise? I'll go ahead and present the questions that we have been given from the board so that our viewers can ponder those as well and have good context for that while we think about those and the document that we've created thus far, and then convene back together. I'll give 5 minutes. Do you think that speaks to what you were trying to get at, Jackson?
Yep, that makes sense.
And now I've got the problem that Norberto has, which is finding the tab. There we go. Okay, so I have us at 5 minutes. So I'm going to stop the presentation on this for now and bring up the document where I have started collecting, for lack of a better term, bullet points. And I will start presenting this. Oh, wait. Oh, I see. I was missing comments in the chat. For the points in the CBRC budget review, I put all the the CBRC queries as the topics from the board. That's what I was just sharing. So I tried to put links to, as far as I knew, all the relevant documents there at the beginning. And as far as the question about editing and suggestions, I don't think I can change that for other people. I think I can only change it for myself. But if other people have more Google Docs wizardry, I am happy to take them up on that. Oh, okay. Well, I have changed it for me, as I think I own it. So we shall see. So thank you. So then I'm going to also, here is what I have. These are the points I have picked out so far. And I will share this with the same group of folks. Just so everybody has it locally. Was it CBRC list? Just a moment. Okay. So, alrighty. So these are the points that I've gotten at so far, and I'll just kind of read through them real quick, and then switch to the board questions, and then make sure we capture any other kind of bullet points that have not been addressed. And people should feel free to add to this. So Renee made a point about the budget being largely impenetrable. And so that very much falls under something that we've acknowledged improvement in, but still clear needs, I think, for a better connection between the things that I can totally enlarge if I am in the right window. Connecting the information that's presented with the information that people want to know. Brad made an excellent point about the district being much more forthcoming with materials prior to meetings. I think we've had much better staff engagement and, mutualism, for lack of a better word. Jackson, who I love the use of double tap, by the way. It's this Instagram language there. So doubling down on the, making it difficult to engage if we don't understand it. And I'm also seeing this particular bullet point around the connecting the additional funds to the outcomes that, what are the targeted investments that we're making. Arena called out specifically that federal funds should be applied to bring kids up to level so that regular budget can have its intended effects for bring everyone up and to further reduce inequities, as opposed to just being kind of skipping over the kids who are not there and engaging it in the budget. Jackson very much called out the how do we get kids who we want to target engaged, highly variable participation with Lippy. Concern from Sarah about staff burnout and demoralization, and how does that affect our ability to bring kids back up to level and get us back on the same page. Brad pointed out that we should call out the results in the map testing that were surprisingly positive, given we were forced to do instruction and learning in a whole new fashion. We should call that out as a positive. And that Sarah acknowledged we should trumpet the positives there, but don't get lost in what it doesn't tell us, and that the data we don't have to support things. Claire pointed out as part of this that there are the school climate surveys coming out, but they're not yet available, so we can't speak to some of those other data points because, as Brad pointed out, like we're limited in the actual data that we have at the moment. And then Jackson, digging into the map data, particularly pointed out that lower participation by BIPOC communities and a decrease in growth met by BIPOC students is troublesome, and that if we're highlighting particular things out of the map, that should very much be one of them. So, are there before we get into the board questions, are there particular points that we want to call out in either the budget process itself or in the budget itself that we have not, that are not captured at all in these bullet points? Okay. Roger put in the one suggestion I made: support the board's efforts to increase the funding formula for alternative schools. Okay. I will put this in here, and then we'll start merging them into the main document as we figure this out. Jackson, you brought up a issue just towards performance measures. Could you clarify or expand?
Yeah, sorry. I just started eating, so that's why it was so short. But what I was trying to get at, which I think I've talked about a couple times in other meetings, was how I feel like the first step is finding out where that money is going. So the equity funding, how we are spending that equity funding, and then, how that funding is achieving our goals. So making sure that the funding that we are using is going in the right place and we are seeing results from that funding, to make sure we know we're funding the right things. Because we can have goals and we can throw funding at it, but in the end, we need to see that that funding provides the results that we want.
So in particular, like transparency and accountability in equity funding?
Equity funding, and I guess funding for the board goals.
So before I dig in that, like, Alana, am I missing something? Do you not have?
It's denying me access to editing it. So
for the one that says draft 2021 CBRC budget review.
No, for the one that you're in currently, where people.
Oh, okay. Let me see if I change this to editing. Does that work?
No.
Okay, now I'm getting the request. I thought Oh,
I
maybe.
got it. Thank you.
Okay, I think it might be a different email there than the one that's on the CBRC list.
Okay.
So I think I shared it to you on a different email.
Okay.
So thank you for calling that out. Okay. So given these things, I do want to get to the questions from the board addressing. Before we get that, Brad, I want to make sure that in particular, like the lens are bringing up, addressing the 3rd grade and 8th grade reading goals and the map data is like addressed here in this. Do you feel like this is what I captured kind of adequately reflects what you're going for there, or do you want to expand upon this or bring up separate points?
No, I think that's fine. I think pulling that out and tie into those two things, I think is good.
Okay, great. All right, Lana, is that? Okay. I see a raised hand from Lisa.
Yeah, I just wanted to, on the map testing and, you know, supporting what the 4 goals are.
Yes.
Just being clear that we're still, that the gap didn't widen, but it's still there is what I believe the interpretation of the results were. So I just want in how we word it to be clear that we are still addressing the gap between our highest and lowest, and that is still what we believe the board's commitment should be. So I don't want to, I just want to make sure that we're clear on how that's that information is represented, is that the gap didn't widen, but the gap is still there.
And to tag on that, can I just ask a clarification? Based on what the map data, reading through it, obviously, it looks like that is quantitative, right? And in the what we're following, all of the guidance, it says we're doing qualitative and quantitative, and I want us to make sure that we do point that out, because as I think Jackson and I were pointing out, the demographic information there's not enough of it to make certain of some of these points. So I just want to make sure that we are doing qualitative and quantitative.
Agreed. And I have some hope that more of the qualitative data is captured in the thing that Claire brought up, the report. I am losing track of all the different reports. Climate survey. Yes, the climate survey, which is more of a qualitative Likert-like set of data. That we're lacking. Also, just, and not to belabor this point, but you know, I have a statistics degree as well, and with these numbers, the one of the things that was pointed out in there, but is that we are dealing with correlations here, not causations, and that while they're relatively, you know, they've got relatively strong predictive behavior, some of these assumptions are also built on the assumption that the people who did not take the map data this year are a randomized, relatively random and across the board selection of the overall student population. So, which may or may not be true. So there are some kind of hidden assumptions in some of these things that we should totally celebrate what we do know, but also acknowledge the gaps in our knowledge. So any other issues about like any other issues that we want to bring up as these like major bullet points for us before I move on to the questions from the board?
Real quick, Judah, I think one thing on that, so I heard Claire earlier say that, Dr. Brown is the best expert that we have.
Mm-hmm.
He put that report together, and he's putting exclamation points all over that thing. I think we need to be very cautious about questioning
a report that he put together for the board, saying that we know better. I think it can be, easy into reading that. I think, for good reason. The district has some things that they need to be happy about.
Mm-hmm.
So
So I think his exclamation points are from the fact that nationally people thought that we were going to have significant learning loss with all students. And when you look, and some of our CBRC members have pointed out pages 9 and 10 where in the memo where it's very clear that the growth was not as strong in our students of color, our BIPOC students. So I think there's a dual message here. It's better than we expected. However, we still have work to do. And I would say with our racial equity and social justice lens, we need to be concerned about our BIPOC students and their results.
And I can also say, Brad, I've not gone round with Dr. Brown, but he does call out in there the limitations of the data. And so by us also noting that, I don't think that if you're a professional and you work with data like that, it's not a bad thing that we don't know. It's just part of doing this work. So I don't think that we are saying, oh, Dr. Brown, you don't know how to do your job or anything like that. We're calling out for folks that are not, that are not familiar with all of these things. We acknowledge that there are limitations and these are great things that we do know, but there's a lot around this that makes an incomplete picture, and that's okay. So I definitely don't want to dig into it as a negative Nelly, but I don't want to pretend that everything is rosy, because we do know that everything is not perfect. So, Roger, you had a hand?
Well, we've early in the evening, we were talking about transparency and trying to make things understandable to the general public and to our constituencies, parents, and so on. Very few people understand chi-square correlations, and you statisticians might delight in discussing them ad nauseum, but let's make sure we don't go off on that beaten path.
I promise not to bring cluster analysis into this even once, Roger. Even though it's so much fun. Trust me. Okay. Great. So if there are no objections, I'd like to go over the topics that the board brought to us. And I can read them out loud, but I'm going to take notes. So I want to see our notes. So the first question was, and I lost which board member sent in what, so we'll treat them as generic, but I would be interested in their perspective on the extra money we are getting due to COVID and how we transparently and effectively use it to support our students this summer and fall, and further their perspective on how those additional funds will specifically move the dial on our board goals. So this feels like it ties in Arena's point earlier, that I captured in here, and also some of Brad's lens about tying this specifically to the 4 board goals. So are there particular points we'd like to bring to play around this?
I would like to mention math, that we should concentrate maybe next year our testing to see how we're doing in math. So the 5th grade math is the kind of like the emphasis or priority for the next year.
So a suggestion that we use federal funds to increase, were you saying that like remediation efforts on math or testing on math? What was the point there? I think I missed it.
To involve more kids into testing in the fall to get the better baseline where we are. I am looking at from the budget money. So I recommend board through the regular fall. I hope it's going to happen to concentrate on the MAP testing in math to get more kids take the MAP testing in the fall. And then depending on what results we get, decide how to spend money for grade improvement, accelerated learning, grade recovery, etc.
Okay, so
like kind of like the board goal in terms of financing and budget should be math.
Okay.
But
So
again,
then in particular, so discussion of targeting funds to remedy what we're seeing as a lack of data around mathematics progress and baselines, so that we can make more data-driven decisions about how to help kids towards that board goal. Cool. All right. Alana.
All right. So I think investing in our community-based organizations or CBOs that are direct services, because our communities, there's more trust within our community, specifically the students that we are and families that we are wanting to bring back and bring forward. And so I really do think that the CBOs can be a partner in all of this healing that we are doing.
Okay. So along those lines, is this specifically speaking to the question of the use of the federal funds for COVID-related things to invest in partnerships with CBOs to better approach the learning gaps, or was that more trust-driven?
Yes.
And Ilana, I don't know if this was part of your line of thinking as well, but there's also a sustainability angle to that, right? Like these are one-time dollars. And so there's a question of sort of what we can do now and what we can sort of plant seeds for longer term. And I think by partnering, investing in stronger partnerships with CBOs, we also have the benefit of these are one-time dollars. If we infuse them into these partnerships now, over time, the partnerships are stronger and we can continue to support students. So I think there's an important sustainability point there as well.
And it might speak to Jackson's point about, how do we target and make sure we actually reach and are heard by the people who may need it most. Okay. We can wordsmith on some of this later. I'm just going to try to knock it out. Other points on this? Specifically, the federal use of federal dollars with an eye on meeting board goal, the 4 board goals.
I have a suggestion to connect CBOs with the high school readiness for the proficient world after high school. So we can involve CBOs in our high school and have kind of like workplace readiness assistance for the high school.
You said like that last part of it again, Arena. I want to capture it because I think you did a really good job. But the post high school
Connect the role of CBOs into preparing high schoolers for their life after high school. Kind of like get them ready to get into first profession. And I think that community-based organizations can really help kind of like mentor them into this professional world. Like prepare to do interviews, help with the resumes, have their headshots, all this kind of like, you know, small things that schools just do not have time, but the community-based people, because they know how it should be done, can help with it.
We'll make this better later. Okay, nice. Other thoughts and approaches? Okay. Okay, great. All right, then let's move on to the, actually, I just want to do a time check and acknowledge we are 7 minutes over, already. I would really love to get through these two and get input on them. And so if folks can stay, I'd appreciate that. Then I'm happy to take these points, move them over to the one shared document, and we can start crafting the final response. Not asymmetrically, asynchronously. That was the word I was looking for. Okay, so thank you for your patience.
When we have to be, when is our due date? Is it
technically it's tonight?
Okay.
But I'm gonna
Because
say
I was
that
thinking
that's
like
not
if
gonna
we can have till like Saturday, we might get really good document. But tonight, okay. Let's do what we can do.
No, we are not expecting you to complete this tonight. So I think you're having a wonderful conversation. So I don't want you to, I think the quality of the report is important. Yes. I also want to make sure that the board has time to read it before the meeting, right? And if you give it to them on Tuesday, many of them work during the day and won't have time to read it before the meeting. So I think if you guys can work on it on Saturday, that would be great. And then, finalize on Sunday. And if you get it to Noberto or I can make sure, or we can make sure that Roseanne is able to send it out to the board.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
And I have blocked off time on my calendar tomorrow to do like wordsmithing and trying to get things more easily editable. And yes, as Roger points out, we have had some 5-hour in-person meetings. I'm really glad that we're not doing as much of that anymore. I'd like to also point out, though, we had cookies for that. We don't have cookies for these remote meetings. We should fix that. But that's a matter for next year's committee, more cookies. Alrighty. So then the second question from the board was, I would be interested in the CBRC's perspective on whether we are spending enough on operational support services versus frontline resources. By operational support services, I mean things like custodial staff, operation maintenance spending on our facilities, communications with our families, HR staff for onboarding new teachers, central office staff that provide support to schools. Frontline services are predominantly classroom teachers. And then the kind of sub questions of that, how how many more custodians would it take to bring our facilities up to a higher standard of cleanliness? Are we spending enough to maintain them, or will our new high schools be run down in 10 years? As COVID has demonstrated just how important many of these administratives at BESC are. So it seems like a good time to look at this. So, Sarah, I see your hand raised first.
Sorry, did you just say my name, Judah? I stepped away for a second.
Yes, your hand is raised.
Oh, no, that's just you can, sorry. That's just left over.
All right, Roger.
Custodians is a concern of mine, and has been for many years. I've followed the board meetings and understand the report is that we are more robustly hiring than we have in previous years. I don't know what that particular status is. I do know that when we have passed bond measures to modernize our high schools have typically been staffed by custodians that end up filling absences at the lower grades. So let a custodian in an elementary school call in. The high school gets tapped for filling the absence. As a result, you have a brand new high school like Franklin, where I was PTSA president, that was supposed to be staffed at 12 for a night shift. That's a 300,000 square foot building. And yet there were many nights when they had a hard time having a staff of 3. So that's a substantial reduction of what was promised to the voters and to the high school itself. Similarly, millions of dollars were spent on the grounds and landscaping and so on, and now we have central controls that come out of the district on sprinkler systems and so on. I can't tell you, but there have been lots and lots of trees and shrubs at Franklin that have not survived because of the want of water. And there are ongoing problems in that, and I would be very much interested in knowing if they're really truly being remedied with this budget.
Okay. Lana's got some great comments in the chat. I think there's a general feeling that I get that everybody shares. I'm curious if the specific question from the board member is like, are things like, how many more custodians would it take to bring our facilities up to a higher standard of cleanliness? So my question is like, do we as a group, do we believe we have the information to answer that kind of question? I genuinely don't know. Are there standards around this? Do we know what they are?
I think the only thing we have to go on is in the budget where it has operations and maintenance of plant services.
Yes.
I believe there's a almost 2.3 million increase for targeted investments to support health and safety of our buildings, includes additional custodial FTE. So I guess that's all we have to go on. We don't have the details behind it, right?
That was genuinely my question. Like, for instance, I was just thinking about Roger's point of like, there's supposed to be 12 people like on the night shift. There were frequently actually 3. Like, I don't know where the supposed to like comes from. And so I'm genuinely curious. Do we know, and Alana makes the point, can we make a recommendation then if we don't? The research does research. So, Norberto, is that something you can speak to?
I don't have information regarding any sort of like formulas and relative information regarding best practices. I know it varies from district to district. I do know that for this budget, we are proposing adding 30 full-time custodians. So from a specificity perspective, that's the goal, but I don't have the information, and maybe Claire, encyclopedia of a wealth of knowledge, like what does that move us up to from a total perspective, or where we've been or what we're trying to do. I know that it's also a board member question that the team is looking to get additional data on.
I know that there are standards, and we have increased our level of standard. I would say that we added custodians when we reopened this year, and we're continuing to hire more. But there is 30 FTE more than last year. But I think there's a good point. When you look at our groundskeepers, Roger, you bring up a good point. We don't have, I know there aren't enough groundskeepers to do what we need to do. The Parks and Rec used to mow a lot of our lawns, and they have now stopped doing that. And we didn't hire more groundskeepers when that happened. So I think that we're doing the analysis right now and preparing an answer for the board, because they also asked staff this question. And so as soon as I have a response, I can share it with you, and it's supposed to be done by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. So we can at least make sure that you have that information that we're sharing with the board by tomorrow morning.
Okay. So I've just pulled in a lot of that information plus what's in the chat. Is it reasonable to sort of summarize this as this has been a historical, widely acknowledged historical underinvestment? We see continued improvement in this budget that it's addressing that, but we lack the standards and the data to say how close we are and whether whether further investments are critical. Is that the thumbs up from people, whether that captures things properly?
Judah, I think that captures it for the custodian side, but I don't think that captures it for the HR staff piece.
Okay. Well, let me write down that one while you all talk about that point.
Yeah, I think for the HR piece, we know that we do need to be more intentional in not just hiring diverse staff, but also ensuring that we have a plan for retention and culture change within our schools. And I do believe that there is that we know that needs to happen based on both qualitative and quantitative, but need to find the quantitative.
Is that something, I know that was an investment category by by central staff, in particular in the recruitment and retention piece. Are there, to speak to like Alona's point, are there particular, like what's informing and what are the standards that went towards the investments that were made? Do we have an understanding of that, Claire and Alberto?
I do not have information on our efforts. I know or at least any specific frameworks outside of racial equity and social justice, and particularly with how we're approaching the work. So like similar to my earlier comment regarding like there's a framework, the RSJ Lens framework, but then like when you apply it across different contexts or functions of the organization. So like I was working with Danny Ledesma from a budgeting perspective. And so like conceptually applying it to HR as well, it's a concerted effort. I just don't know like any specific details. And I mean, selfishly, I'll point to myself as part of that concerted effort. and as we think about that work and how we continue to increase our diversity. But Claire, I don't know if you have additional details specifically from an HR strategy and how that's evolving.
I know that we have a system shift. I think it's C, and specifically about this. And we have a work team that is meeting 3 times this week to finalize metrics and objectives for the strategy that was introduced last spring. So it's not complete yet. It will about May 15th. I'd probably be able to share that with the CBRC, but it won't be in time for this report. Then at that point, the Dr. Russ Brown that we were speaking about earlier, that's part of he and his team's role is for them to give out quarterly reports. And those will begin next year on our strategic plan. And so we'll have metrics in place and reporting on a regular basis. And so I know I keep promising it's going to get better, but we are, I really mean it. And I wish I had it for you tonight. I really do, but I just don't.
Well, as was acknowledged at the very beginning of these points, like the data we have gotten better data. And like more so as there's been better engagement between staff, board, and the CBRC to share data. So the fact that we're having these conversations and starting to produce these things is a big thumbs up. So thank you.
So, yeah, so I think one track we could take in this report that I propose is that, like, I think it's fine for us to say, like, we think these things are important. We think that investing in increasing central office capacity to make sure we meet our hiring and support and retention goals as it relates to a teacher workforce that is more reflective of the students we serve in PPS. We don't see evidence, right? Like, I think it's okay to say we don't see evidence of this, and we should be able to see evidence of this, right? Like and I think Ilana's making really important points in the chat. Like it isn't enough to set a goal around hiring, more diverse teachers. We have to have resources and a plan in place to support those teachers to be successful in school settings where they continue to be, surrounded by other educators who don't look like them, to thrive in those schools and to stay in their positions. I think we have historically had a retention problem, and not unique to Portland, but definitely, evident here. So all that to say, I think it's fine for us to say we don't have evidence in this. We don't see evidence in the budget of those investments being made. If we don't, in fact, I do think we can do a little bit more homework to go back into the budget and make sure that that's true. But I think it's fine for us to say that.
I agree with you, and that's one of the things that Noberto is really focused on, is helping our budget team incorporate dollars that support the strategic plan strategies, as well as the metrics and outcomes that and objectives we're striving for. So we are so fortunate to have him as our new CFO. So you're really going to get some treasures in terms of how we roll things out and beginning in the fall and moving forward. So we're on the verge here, and I'm just really excited about where we're headed. And I really appreciate the fact that you guys have been so patient and waiting for us to get this all together.
So I like to tell people, how do we take this technical book, the budget, and turn it into this compelling story that folks can relate to and add to that transparency. So really a strategic story, the strategic intentional storytelling. And so, yeah, that'll be the work the year ahead.
You're on mute, Judah.
Okay. I want to say something. There was a good phrase yesterday used that during the last 3 years, the budgeting process changed. We flipped from enrollment-based model to the student-centered and need-based. It's not perfect, but it's the first step in the right direction.
And we hope to see that and that it continues. I also see a couple of hands, so I want to make sure I go through there. Oh, wait, 2 of them disappeared. Sarah and Lisa, did your hands disappear on purpose? Okay. Then Roger.
I concur with what the thrust of this discussion about hiring, but I also would encourage the district to share more about what they are doing and have been doing. For example, is typically a concern is having a faculty that resembles the student body, and yet that is the goal of every district in the United States, and schools of education are just simply not turning out the candidates that we need to fulfill that goal, at least unless something has starkly changed. Even in the state of Oregon, the schools of education are having problems with turning out faculty candidates of color and so on. I think I'm all for banging the drum for hiring such personnel, but I think it's unfair to beat the district about the head if indeed the resource is not available. The last I knew, the state PPS was recruiting in 6 states outside of Oregon, including Alabama and the East Coast and so on, and so that's why it gets back to my comment about I think we need to know more about what the district is now doing, and before we can say what you should be doing.
Can I jump in, Judah, with a quick response?
Yes.
Or someone else's hand?
I was going to call on you next.
Sorry, it just got really loud. So points well taken. I am familiar, Roger, with kind of the national data that you're citing. And I'm not really willing to give PPS a pass on a lot of things that are in its control when it comes to creating an environment that teachers of color would want to be a part of, come to, and want to stay in. And I don't think we've seen evidence of that. And I think that there are a lot of things within the purview of a school district that, while the pipeline may not be as robust as we would like, I think there are a lot of aspects of just how we do business as a school system and in general, like here in Portland and elsewhere, where we do need to stop and interrogate our practices and ask ourselves why we are not successfully attracting and retaining teachers of color at the rates that we would like to be, that are separate from the pipeline issues. And so I do think it's important for us to comment on. That is my perspective. And I think there is a lot of evidence to suggest that if we as a district are more successful in hiring, supporting, retaining teachers of color, that it can make a significant difference in terms of outcomes for students, student experiences and outcomes, in particular for the students that the board has committed to doing better by. So, and I think we have a lot of qualitative evidence to say that teachers feel unsupported in PPS, and in particular, teachers of color feel really unsafe and unsupported. So I do think that we should push on things that are within the district's purview to do.
Okay. Roger, I see your hand still up. Was that the crux of what you were getting at, or did you have a response?
I apologize. That doggone symbol is hard to navigate for me somehow.
It really is.
In response to Sarah, I was responding to her in the chat. I don't disagree with what she's saying, but I also don't know that we as a committee really know what supports the district is now offering, whether those are obviously Sarah feels they're inadequate. I know retention, when the first year we moved, my family moved here from the Midwest, we found the rain was really quite insufferable. And but you know, as the moss began to grow and our wet feet developed, we came to love this place. So retention is a hard thing to, I think, measure. We can know that we hired and so stayed 1 year, they stayed 2, 3 years, and then they left. I've made my point, I guess.
Actually, so I did call out here in the bullet point. I said budget's been set aside for this, but we still lack an understanding of the work being done there, whether it's likely to achieve the outcomes we desire, and whether the investment is adequate. So that was what I was trying to capture is do we know? Do we have a good understanding and a qualitative and quantitative understanding of why people, why people stay, why people leave, promotion opportunities, those sorts of things. If that information does exist, I don't know that we've shared it, but it's a thing to call out. So are there other points that folks want to make on this second question about staffing and support operations and how they are addressed in the budget? Or are there particular recommendations that we've not, these both call out a need for better information and better data. Are there concrete recommendations we would like to weigh in based off of what we think we do know? Okay. And this will all get put together in a document that will then refine together and such. So it's not the only time to weigh in on this, but I just want to make sure I capture as much as possible while we're all here together. And then let everybody get out the door. So then I'll move on to the third question. The third and final question from the board is, how are we demonstrating our commitment to racial equity, and how is that expressed in our budget? We do a good job of stating our commitment and not as good job of expressing or demonstrating how this commitment translates into outcomes. So I'd like to hear more real talk about how we demonstrate that commitment, how this commitment has shaped the way we allocate dollars, and what we might expect to see with this new commitment that's different than the way we did things before we committed to addressing equity. So that is a solid chunk of stuff to dig into that gets at the heart of a lot of our discussions. So Sarah, I see your hand up. Is that still up, or is this something you'd like to weigh in on?
No, it is just still up. Bad form, sorry.
One thing I might be interested in highlighting is, and I'm losing once again all my documents, but the documents that were just shared with us about the ResJ lens, and no, that's disaggregated data. Yes, the ResJ lens that was shared with us, the budget application. Roger has a good point, and I want to come back around to that, but I want to make sure we're on the this question. So we got shared with this file that's the racial equity and social justice lens, the budget application, which I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Claire and Norberto, this is the attempt to really respond to some of the crux of this, if I understand it, and say, how are we specifically addressing the ResJ lens and utilizing it in our budget? Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, and taking that next step in from a data informed perspective as well. So and really asking some very poignant questions regarding racial equity and social justice, and then how are we setting ourselves up to start measuring it and putting resource and aligning resources to it.
And I just scrolled back and grabbed Claire's message from earlier that has the links to the budget priorities and highlights and the ResJ lens budget development. So I'd like to call out the fact that this document now exists as a positive. I think that's very responsive. And I think it is a fabulous start and something that we should have make sure that we do every year.
Judah, one thing that
Yeah.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
I think I have too many devices going in my house right now for some reason. So one thing that I have not explicitly seen evidence of, but I admit that I don't know where it would show up, is when we think about racial equity and social justice, a lot of the experiences our students in the district have are with the adults that are sort of most commonly in their orbit. So teachers, right? They're assigned teachers, whether it's, the teacher of record for a third grader or the 7 teachers that any high school student has, if they're on a 7-period schedule. And I hear, and I really appreciate, Claire, you sharing that document, and I'm glad to see that ResJ lens is that analysis is taking place. I'm not seeing a ton of evidence of what resources are being targeted to support teachers to be able to engage with students to create a safe classroom environment, to have, yes, you may, to have, to be able to tackle really
challenging issues. Again, anecdotally, this year there were so many opportunities for teachers, like my daughter is very young, to come at a lot of what was happening in the world around them and create space for conversation and understanding that just didn't happen, and lots of missed opportunities. So now I'm rambling, but I think there's a missing link for me in terms of where the district is investing in ensuring that, every teacher feels resourced and supported to create a safe environment, and one that is rooted in the ResJ principles in their classrooms. I don't know exactly how to say that, so if we decide to include it, we can talk more about it, Judah, but just one thing that I noticed.
So if I am summarizing that correctly, that would be the ResJ Lens document does not call out staff support. Is that fundamentally what you're trying to get at?
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Sorry. Someone's trying to steal my dinner that I'm trying to eat late. She's having a second dinner now that was supposed to go to me. Yeah, I think so. It's hard for me to understand the ways in which the district whether and how the district is supporting educators to create the kind of safe, welcoming to all students learning environment, and be able to be anti-racist and bring a racial equity lens to their classroom every day. I don't really know a better way of saying it, and maybe I need to think more about it, but I just am not seeing clear evidence of that. Doesn't mean it's not happening, sort of to my point before. It just means that I'm not seeing evidence of it in the budget documents that I'm looking at.
Trying to figure out how to capture.
Yeah, if you just want to leave a placeholder, I can work on it.
Yeah, no, I'll get there because I want to. I guess what I'm trying. Excuse me. What I'm trying to go there is capturing what you feel is sort of negative space about the ResJ budget application, like a thing that isn't in there that you would like to see. But I was thinking that it would be nice to frame that as part of what is in there that we're appreciative of, or maybe lacking in. One thing I noticed is that that I'm wondering whether we want to comment on is the level of specificity. So for instance, I'm looking at how will Black and Native students experience a greater sense of belonging, which is a question in the ResJ Lens, which is a great question. And one of the responses is increase funding for racial equity and social justice partnership contracts, getting to the CBOs, for culturally specific strategies, culturally specific family engagement, wraparound services, mentoring, leadership development, extended day enrichment activities, and positive cultural identity development. It's okay, that's great. But to me, as soon as I read that, I want to be okay, awesome. What's the increase? How much, where did we, and is there a trade-off somewhere else? Are we, what did we increase it by $1, or did we increase it by 30%, and double it and such? So, that is, something that I don't know whether other people have the same sort of feeling when they read that, or whether this is the right level of communication. Before I dig into that, Claire just brought up a very good point, which is being kind to Norberto, who's been up since 3 o'clock in the morning our time. So before we dig into that, are there any other questions specifically that we would like Norberto to weigh in on? No?
I appreciate you all. Thank you so much. And I do feel compelled to comment on, it's like, bye, get out of here, no. on your question, Judah, just that is right. Like I think the crux of conversations to come is that it's a pie, not a well. And so how do we start obtaining compelling data and information to start having those trade-off conversations and say, like, well, you know what? How much do we invest? But guess what? We also want more custodians, and we also want more, fill in the blank. So what is that compelling argument? But then also, right, from an advocacy perspective, because there's that opportunity there, right? We talk about, like, let's fund education, and then we can get all the compelling reasons together. But yes, I will go to bed.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, both for taking the time with us, but also for all the work that's gone into everything here. So I hope you have very sound sleep, because there's a lot of thoughts up in the head. But thank you.
I appreciate you all, and of course we can. I'll keep an eye out for emails and other things tomorrow. So thank you, and have a great night.
Appreciate it.